Hello, and welcome to Mental Health Matters. I'm your host, Liz Lang. Each week on this podcast, we will break down various aspects of mental health. We are so excited you're here and hope you enjoy this week's episode. Hey guys, Liz Lang here with Jeremiah and Selena Woodruff. And this week we are going to get into the effects of divorce on children. And I feel like that it is important to acknowledge right off the bat how difficult, how complicated, and often painful this situation can be. And it can be a really sensitive topic. Nobody gets married planning or even hoping that they're going to get a divorce. And I think that is more so once there are kids involved. And so I don't think divorce is something anybody wants. But there's a little bit of a conundrum in this because on the one hand, divorce is really hard for kids, but high conflict in a home can also be really hard for kids. And so it's this question of, do we separate and do we split up to hopefully have less conflict in our home, or do we stay together and work it out so we can all be a family? That's a tough choice to make. There's no easy answer. And sometimes there's no right or no wrong answer. Sometimes you're just trying to make the best out of a bad situation. So I want to start off by acknowledging that because that's important. What are your guys' thoughts?
Yeah, and before we dive in too deep, I just want to remind everyone that the things that we share should not replace any advice from lawyers or other professionals.
Mm-hmm.
You know, what we're sharing is for entertainment purposes, so to say.
Right.
And if you are experiencing a divorce, you really need to, or the potential of a divorce, you really need to make sure you're getting appropriate professional help for you, for your children, and for anyone affected by it. You know, Liz, I think you're right. It is a difficult situation that nobody wants to experience, but sometimes is absolutely necessary. And so, what we want to focus on today is certainly we'll talk about some of the effects, but we also really think we're going to focus on kind of helping kids work through this and how we can best help others, through this difficult time.
Right, because no matter what you do, you could do everything perfectly and do it just by the book and have like this, what you might call a picture perfect divorce. Everything's amicable and your kids are still going to internalize it. It is just the reality of the situation. And again, I hear where parents are coming from, because on the one hand, if there's constant conflict and there's constant fighting and yelling and screaming and shouting, that's not good for kids either. And so, sometimes maybe divorce is the best option or the better option. And so we'll kind of talk about good ways or kind of healthy ways to help kids navigate and to work through that. And each kid is individual, each kid is unique, and they're all going to experience it different. But I want to get your guys' thoughts on this idea of kids internalizing it, because they are going to, and they're going to somehow make it their fault no matter how much you reassure them. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, it is a tricky situation when it comes to that. And kids will, it depends on their age and their experience and what's happening, but sometimes they will, take it on themselves. They'll blame themselves. I once worked with a young kid who did exactly that. The divorce situation was as ideal as divorce could be, if that's even appropriate to say, but still they blamed themselves and went through a lot of difficult things because they blame themselves. And really the key there is getting kids professional help.
Yeah.
I would always recommend that a kid see a counselor if mom and dad are going through a divorce, to help work through that from an independent party, independent of mom and dad. Mom could say, all the things, and dad could say all the things that, no, this isn't you, this is all about us, but it really doesn't seem to matter. So getting them professional help will be key for them in learning how to cope with that and deal with that massive life change for them.
And that is what it is, a massive life change, because, all of a sudden mom and dad are not living in the same house. They're most likely to be living in two separate places now, and everything in their life is going to shift and change.
Well, and I think that's where some of the internal struggles will come, because depending on ages, how they're internalizing that is going to be like the confusion fear of abandonment or even change in routine. Kids like to know what's expected and like to have that routine and know what's going on. So when you have two households that they are, and they have to flip flop back and forth between those expectations, and also the feeling of like loyalty to what parent and feeling like they have to be loyal to one or the other. And also as they get older, and we like to focus on teens, right? But having them, there's going to be that increased independence and the risk-taking behavior and having trust with relationships, right? When they had a relationship that they felt they trusted and now that's broken. So rebuilding that trust in relationships.
Yeah. And another thing probably to point out that they're experiencing, I think Selena hit a lot of those, but is there's going to be an academic and social impact as well. Typically we end up changing schools, and sometimes, unfortunately, there's a socioeconomic change as well, because now we're taking whatever income we had and we're splitting it across two households. And so maybe, mom or dad or somebody has to live in an area that is not as affluent as they once were. And so they end up going to a school that has maybe a different set of challenges than they were experiencing. Not only that, but it's just hard on kids to change schools. There's that social impact. If mom gets, primary custody, but mom is the one who moved away, well, what about friends and those connections that are happening there, especially when we get into that, 9, 10 and older age where friends are such an important part of their lives, that could have a big impact. So there's all these different things that are going on for them. And I think that really leads us to the next question of, okay, so what do we do? How do we help?
Right. So I think it could be important to lump this maybe into two different categories where one parent completely loses custody because of safety or legal reasons, and mom and dad have split custody. And when one parent loses custody for legal reasons, whether it was abuse, neglect, they're going to jail, what have you, in that instance, that is still really tough and really heartbreaking. And that's going to be really traumatic for a kid. But, in that instance, I would almost say professional help is essential. And that's really where you've got to go in that direction, especially if the child witnessed abuse, they were abused, they were neglected of any sort. That child absolutely needs professional counseling, because that's not something any parent should be handling on their own. Now, in the instance of mom and dad are just splitting custody, this is where we can give lots of good tips and advice. And so my immediate thought when in terms of helping kids is to always remember that no matter what, your child is half of that parent. So if you are bad-mouthing that parent or you are saying negative things about that parent, they're going to internalize that and they're going to think, well, my dad or my mom is a bad person. Am I a bad person because I'm 50% them? So I think that's one thing that's really important, or at least a really important place to start. And I know with divorce, there are tons of horrible, awful feelings, and it's just, there's a lot of negativity. There's a reason you're getting a divorce, right? So as much as you can, keep the kids out of the conflict between mom and dad.
Yeah, and it's a hard one because you may keep the conflict out and the partner doesn't. But regardless of what the partner does, you can't control what they do or don't do, but you can control what you do. Regardless of what they do, it is important that leave the adult problems to the adults, because you certainly will increase the loyalty conflicts, right? Well, if I want to go stay at mom's house, dad's going to be mad at me and not like me because he thinks XYZ about mom, or he says whatever about mom, or vice versa. And so we want to leave them out of that piece of it. And it's certainly, a high stress, high emotion, high tension type of situation, but leaving the kids out and communicating at age appropriate levels with your children to help them understand what's happening. And again, I'm never going to stop on this idea of you've got to get some professional help for them and help that child, through that life experience.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think things that we've already shared with having that relationship with our teenager or child applies in this situation too. So it's really looking at yourself of, who do I want to be? What can I control? What am I making this mean? So when you have situations or conflicts or things that you don't agree with, you can always ask yourself those questions, right? What am I making this mean about me? If there's something maybe bad said or a situation or a conflict, but also who do I want to be and what kind of relationship do I want to have with my child? So these actually can have opportunities for connection with your child, helping understand what they're experiencing and helping have that compassion to them of what they are experiencing instead of trying to fix it for them, but helping them guide through it and having that relationship to connect with them through these situations.
Yeah, absolutely. And letting them grieve and mourn. I think that's going to be an important part. I think it's going to be a very natural reaction to just try to make everything happy and just try to do as much positive things as you can. It's like, oh, we're in this bad situation. Let's just make the best out of it. And those are certainly some good things to do. But I also think it's really important to give kids space and the voice to mourn what they've lost. Because no matter what, mom and dad no longer live in the same household, or, if you were mom and mom, dad and dad, whatever your family dynamic is, it's changed. They need to be able to mourn that loss, and they need to be able to be vocal and say, I miss this. And they need to be able to say that without mom and dad coming back and saying, well, I did this because it was the best. This was just the best. I think if your kid comes to you and says, I miss us all living together in the same house, I think a much better response is, oh, I know, but this, is say, yeah, I get it. I understand why, and just let them feel what they feel and let them express how they feel about it.
Yeah, we certainly want to validate their feelings and acknowledge the reality of what they are experiencing in comparison to what we're experiencing, because it's going to be very different for the child than it is for the parent. And as a parent, we don't get to choose how they experience it. They get to choose how they experience it and what they do. What we get to choose is how we respond to them and how we help. And I love that Selena said it could be an opportunity, or maybe Liz, I don't remember which one of you said it now, but one of you said, it is an opportunity for connection, and it certainly can be. And that connection will come when we validate those experiences, when we give them the space to experience whatever feelings and emotions are coming through that process.
I think it's important to point out too, also that, some of us don't choose divorce, and our partner has made other choices and they don't, and no longer want to be in the relationship. And so you could easily be listening to this and feeling guilty for these things happening in your life, or I guess anybody experiencing divorce could feel that guilt of how it's affecting your children. But I want to believe that we can focus on our thoughts about the situation. All is not lost. You can still build a good life for your kids, and maybe look at some of the things that your kids are being able to learn through this situation that can help them in their life in other ways.
Yeah. So my older brother, I feel like he has done a pretty good job of figuring out the co-parenting thing. Their son he has no memory of them being together. So all he has known is them co-parenting. But I always appreciate the way that he has done it. And that is, he has never once badmouthed her in front of his kid. In fact, no one in the family does. And obviously there's a lot of hurt feelings between all the family members. And we're all very careful about what we say about his mother, in front of him and in general, right? So we try to be very careful, and they have found a way to co-parent very, very well. Now, it's also been a number of years. And so I think that's another thing to keep in mind is time helps a lot. So it's going to be hard and it's going to be messy in the beginning, and you just got to work through the kinks and you got to figure things out. You got to figure out where the boundaries are and make all of these discoveries, right? And just let it be a process.
Well, and even if you have made mistakes and you have done things that are hurtful or maybe not right on track of what who you want to be, I mean, today's the day. Let's do it. Tomorrow, let's start over and start being who you want to be and what kind of relationship you want to have.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, let's take a quick break and we will be right back.
What's up, everyone? Steve here with the Balance of Gray podcast. It's a brand new podcast.
That's good news.
Funny news stories, serious topics, and spiritual growth.
Phenomenon is what it is.
I can promise this won't be quite like anything you've heard before in a Christian podcast. The Balance of Gray brings raw discussions that get to the root of some of the hardest questions. In every few episodes, we feature inspiring testimonies from those who have walked the walk. There's already a good lineup of episodes for you to dive into, so go check them out and tune in on Wednesdays for a great time and a bold twist on igniting your faith. You can find the Balance of Gray podcast on nearly every listening platform out there. Start listening now.
Pretty good, huh?
Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about healthy co-parenting strategies and what that can look like. Now, there's obviously going to be some legalities in here. And so, that's kind of going to be your first step. Is oftentimes courts will decide who spends what time where. So, but there's other pieces of, things like, what does it look like if, say, your kid wants to go spend a night at a friend's house or something like that, but it's dad's weekend or it's mom's weekend and things like that. And just, changes in life, changes in situations, and just maybe give us some good, healthy co-parenting strategies to work towards.
I think that getting on the same page is always the best, right? Like if we can agree that this is where we're going to be, these are the kind of the foundations of parenting that we're going to continue to adhere to. If that's possible, that's the direction that we want to go. Mm-hmm. It's not always possible, and we can't control the other person. And that's always an important piece to remember. You can't control the ex-spouse, and you probably learned that through marriage, that you couldn't even control them when you were married.
Yeah.
And so what you do get to control is you and the decisions you make. And so you really want to communicate and work with them. And of course, always following the law. If it's dad's weekend, it's dad's weekend, regardless of what the child wants. If the child wanted to spend the night, and if there's room and the relationship is such, then hey, dad, our son wanted to go stay the night at his friend's house tonight. It's your night, so you get to make that decision, obviously, right? Mm-hmm. So working with the other parent in those and yourself. One of the things that I've seen be very helpful is being flexible within reason yourself. Now, it doesn't mean you just give in and you never get the things that you want, but you could easily recognize, like, hey, it's not my weekend, but it's grandma's, 75th birthday and we're having a big party. Can't I take our son and let him enjoy the birthday party with grandma and let grandma see him? Well, if there's not a reason to say no, why would you say no? And finding that flexibility, if it's possible. Sometimes that's just not a reality. I get that. But being a little bit flexible yourself can be incredibly helpful, because I promise there's going to come a time when you're going to go, it's not my weekend, but man, I would really like to have them at this. And if you've been completely inflexible, I guarantee you the other party will return that in kind.
Yeah, that's a good point. I like that idea of flexibility.
When we can set aside our own hurt and ideas of what it should be, and we really focus on the child and what's best for the child, I think we're going to find that supporting them in that relationship that they have with the other parent is actually going to be healthy for your child. And it's going to help them to grow, and they're going to learn from this situation to help them in their life. So maybe focusing on supporting the child's relationship with both parents. So not just you, but understanding that the other person has things that are going to be of value and help them in their life. And supporting that is in turn actually going to be helpful for your child. And
I get it. Like, it almost would feel good if you're like, yeah, they like me better than you. They want to be with me, right?
Yeah.
But man, I would say avoid those thoughts as much as possible and avoid that path, because it's going to lead to hurt on both sides. And so I love that Selena brought that up, that idea of supporting their relationship with both, because the important thing about this all is that it's still their mother, still their father, and it always will be. And so if you undermine that relationship, you become, part of the reason why they have that struggle in that relationship. And we don't want to go that way.
I think it's important to realize that we're kind of making a generalization. We can't say about each person specifically in their situations. And I'm sure that there's situations that some things can be more damaging than helpful. So I guess just making sure that we realize that we're kind of making a blanket generalization of an ideal situation, not that it is going to be what it is for each person in their situation individually, but just more focusing on our thoughts about the situation and how that's affecting and what it's creating for us in our own lives. And if we don't like what it's creating in our own lives, then let's look at our thoughts and how we can make adjustments there to help us to create the life that we want to be living.
And the life we probably want our children to be living. Because I think, what I've heard you say a lot, Selena, is that we're focused on the long term and helping them to have long-term happiness and long-term successful relationships. And this is going to be a huge mountain to climb. And that's just the reality of the situation. And it's not anything that anybody wanted, but it is. And so, you have to just deal with it and you have to face it and just do your best to make as many teaching opportunities as you can out of it. And, recognize that kids can also be incredibly resilient and they can come through hard things and be okay in the end.
Yeah, your children are resilient and they're powerful. These are just some tips and thoughts about, some things that could be done in this most difficult of circumstances. And I appreciate Selena, talking about how every situation is truly different. And there are definitely unique situations in all of our lives. And that's why we keep really pounding this important piece of getting the professional help that's necessary for you and your children to navigate these sometimes very, very murky waters in these confusing times, and to help you through that process, especially where you're trying to avoid having negative conversations about the other parent with your children.
Yep.
Like, you need a space to be able to communicate those things, and counseling is a wonderful place for that type of expression of thoughts and experiences.
Yeah, it's a great way to get all of the bad and all the ick out. Because you can tell your counselor the horrible, terrible things you think about your ex-partner. And, because it's meant to be a safe space for you to share your open thoughts and open feelings. And it's much, much better that you say it to a counselor or a therapist or a professional than to your kids or to a family member or to someone else where it can harm relationships elsewhere. So we've talked about doing our best to keep the kids out of conflict. I think another thing that can be important is to, as much as possible, establish a routine that the kids can rely on, because kids thrive on stability and they thrive on routine. That can be so critical for kids. And obviously, like we've said over and over, you can't control everything. Something's going to happen. Someone's going to get sick. I mean, that is just life. But as much as possible, providing your kids with a stable routine that they can rely on is going to be huge in helping them cope and giving them forewarning, right? So like if there is a change in plans, saying, oh, hey, this is supposed to happen. You're supposed to do this with dad this weekend, but, he's had a work emergency and now he can't. So, we're going to do this instead, and trying to give them as much advance notice as you can when plans do change.
Yeah, I think that's a great direction, Liz, working with your children through that process. And I think we alluded to that earlier, right? Just as much open communication as is appropriate for their age. Definitely, we're not sharing, all the reasons for divorce. We're not sharing how awful each other is, but communicating with them what's happening and as much of why as we can without damaging relationships.
I think any kid wants to know what's going on, whether you're in a divorce or not.
Yeah.
Because I get that question every night. So what are we doing tomorrow? They want to know what to expect and what's expected of them. So I think that's a great way of being able to build that consistency and routine to help them to feel more secure and safe when they know what's going on and what's to be expected.
Yeah, they have a lot of the fear of the unknown. And so when they know, it is helpful for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And, just when you feel like you've gotten everything figured out, you've set your boundaries and everything feels like it's flowing nicely, things are going to change because chances are one or both of you is going to enter into another relationship. And then it's going to get even more complicated. And then there's going to have to be even more communication because there's going to be even more adults involved with your child's life and even more co-parenting that's going to have to happen. And, blending families is another really interesting topic that we could go into, and we probably will at some point, is this idea of having to blend families. So again, I think it's just about honesty. And another struggle that I think divorced parents can have is when one parent is what you might call, it's sometimes referred to as the Disneyland parent or the good time parent, right? Where it seems like, they're there to do all the fun stuff and they don't provide any structure. That can be really, really hard and really difficult. And so again, you just need to think about, okay, what kind of a relationship do I want my child to have, and how do I want them to be able to thrive in this relationship? And in those instances, I promise you, eventually this child is going to figure that out. As they grow older, they will come to realize, oh, this parent is just the good time parent, and I can't really rely on them for serious or important things because they were only there for the fun times, and the hard stuff was just, they bailed, right? Eventually that will come out.
Yeah, in general it will. I don't know if it always does, but I think you're right. I think that if it's a common occurrence where we feel guilty for the difficult things that our children are experiencing because of the choices we made as adults, right? And so sometimes we want to make up with that with lavish gifts or special vacations or be the good time parent, right? So we feel like we're making up for that. And I do think that the structure is good. We certainly need to have the fun times. We need to have the family vacations and the experiences in conjunction with the standard daily regular routine. But, to your point, I think it's important to recognize that it seems like a long time that we have our kids, but, if we look at right around, 18 years that we have them in our home and then they're adults and they form their own opinions and live their own lives. So cherish that time and focus on how do we build and develop the relationship? How do we connect with them? How do we build their capacity to have other relationships with other people, including an ex-spouse or an ex-partner? And how do we just build that within them the best we can in the short period of time that we get with them?
If you're not the fun time parent, let me offer you a thought or do a little coaching on that, because you definitely could live in resentment and frustration. And that's great. You can choose that too, that you could resent them for being that way. It's more empowering when we think of something more like, hey, this is so great that I am able to give my child consistency and boundaries. I'm teaching them a lot of really good skills for life. To me, that's way more empowering than living in resentment for what somebody else is doing and how they're affecting your kids. What you can control is what you're experiencing. So really looking at those thoughts and empowering yourself of the good that you're doing and the not good you're doing too, because, we're 50-50 with parents. I hope we're good and bad, but there's things you're doing too. But just really focusing more on you and empowering you, those thoughts are going to be way more valuable in the way that you are living your life and having that relationship with your kid.
Yeah, I think a common theme that's come out of today is focus on what you can control. And the reality is you can't control your ex-spouse and you can't control what goes on over there, but you can control how you react within your own home. And that's going to be another difficult thing to navigate, is there could be different boundaries at dad's house than mom's house. That can create some conflict. But all you can control is the way you react and the way you handle. And hopefully your first reaction is going to be love, boundaries, and acceptance rather than control and fix the behavior and stopping just bad behavior because it's uncomfortable, or rather than, as Selena has said time and time again, looking at it from why is my child acting this way? Like, what are they experiencing right now that is causing this behavior, and coming at it from their point of view rather than, I don't like what you're doing, stop it, which is a normal gut reaction for a parent.
Well, here's the reality for you to really look at. You being upset and frustrated and all of that, who's experiencing that? Is your ex experiencing that? No. You're the one that's experiencing all of that. So really all it's doing is affecting and damaging you. Yeah. They're not experiencing those feelings that you have. You're creating that for yourself.
Yep. Okay, so conclusions, final takeaways.
Just in concluding, again, I want to reiterate the importance of getting the help that's necessary through this process. If you start to notice that your child is being more withdrawn or is no longer interested in normal activities, all of a sudden is fighting, to stay at one person's house or the other when they weren't, in the past, just paying attention to those potential signs of change. And when we see that, we want to certainly make sure that they're getting additional emotional support through counseling or somebody that they can talk to that's not a parent. They may not be willing to share with you what's happening because of fear of loyalty issues or fear of making the problem worse, especially when they already feel guilty or that maybe it's their fault. So they need somebody they could talk to that is uninvolved, meaning, a professional counselor or something like that.
I just want to reiterate that parents don't have to be perfect. We're human beings. We're going to make mistakes, and we can learn and grow through all of this. So showing that love and support and having that compassion and empathy for our children of what they're experiencing, to not take it personal and make it mean something about you, but really listening to what they're experiencing and helping to be that mentor to guide them through and get the help that they need and be there to love and support them.
Yeah, and my final takeaway is, as much as possible, let them be a kid. Don't involve them in your parental adult affairs. I mean, as much as possible, shield them from that so that they can, be a kid and do kid things and not feel like they have to fix mom or dad or take mom or dad's side. Let them feel loved and secure in both relationships, as much as possible. Okay, so next week we are going to lighten things up a little bit and talk about teens and dating. Good thing to talk about because hopefully everybody is going to go through it because, well, teens are social creatures. So we're going to get into that next week and we will see you all then. Have a question? How about a topic you'd like us to cover? Send us an email at mentalhealthpod21@gmail.com.